Thank you very much. Our next speaker is Markus Silber. His topic is Poland or Lithuania, but which one? Zionism, minority rights, and the nation state.
Historical research tends to emphasize, and rightly so, the centrality of Zionists in mobilization in favor of minority rights. Zionism in Eastern Europe has thus become identified with the struggle for minority rights, often described as not as an ethnocentric, ethno-nationalist movement, but rather as tolerant and humanistic, defending the rights of others, if may use Carol Fink's the title of Carol Fink's seminal book. When historicizing the genealogy of the Zionist discourse of minority rights from fin de siècle Russia through interwar Zionist practices in Poland and Lithuania to the Israeli arena, we can highlight surprising patterns of continuity and discontinuity and subtle transferences over time and space through Eastern Europe as well as to the State of Israel. To explore these developments, I would like to examine the Zionist attitudes towards minority rights in view of the formation of new nation-states in Eastern Europe, since the two are deeply intertwined. For our purpose here, Zionism refers to activist political action and their interpretation of Zionist ideas, and because of the lack, to be brief, I will concentrate on two persons. A nation-state is another complex concept, as Valery Tishkov noted. All attempts to develop terminological consensus around nation-state resulted in failure. However, for the purposes of this paper, I follow the definition of my lecturers' subjects, who talked about a geopolitical unit, more or less sovereign, that draws its political legitimacy from its overlapping and/or relations to an ethno-national group that constitutes the majority in the territorial unit, or based on a historical precedent, has the right to constitute it. When we talk about minority rights from a Gestalt or a structuralist constructivist perspective, a majority group supposedly stands at the background. It becomes the reference group for the minority group's discussion. Its members are privileged. Their position within society is secured. This sense of security, the minority group would like to have too, a natural and egalitarian type of belonging. Because of their difference, the minorities group's type of belonging is not as simple and straightforward. This gap creates the need to negotiate and conceptualize the differences and resolutions. Is minority a relevant or an absolute term? Is it an eternal attribute of a particular group or a structural part of a society? Can a minority become part of the majority? And what will happen to its belonging then? Is the attribute of minority changing over time between different groups and society? When feminists, for example, address women as minority, they don't relate to statistics. They talk of a structural and universal context of inequality. In every society there are men and women. Women need not to become a statistical majority to improve their sense of belonging in society. Zionists argued the Jewish problem was both statistical, the need to become a majority, and structural, establish their legitimate status in the nation state. In this case, it is especially interesting to see what happens to this concept in different contexts. One, during the process of nation states building in Eastern Europe, and other, after becoming an ethnic majority with the War of 1948 and the establishment of the State of Israel. While in the first stage, the statistical status as minority remained, in the second stage, the statistical meaning mixed with the political meaning. It is thus interesting to follow the same people when it seems that for them as for others, everything concerning minority rights and the nation state has changed. I will highlight briefly the issue at three different points. Before the creation of the new states in East Central Europe, during the early during the early 20s, when the concrete construction of building of the nation states, and third, And finally, after the establishment of the State of Israel, when Jews became the ethnic majority with a considerable Palestinian minority in the newly formed state. For the sake of my argument, I shall compare the discussions regarding nation-states in two contexts, Poland and Lithuania, states established mostly or totally on the Pale of Settlements, northwestern region and Congress Poland, formerly territories under the Tsar's regime. I am following David Engel's argument that the Polish Zionism was caught in what he called the double standard in light of the nation-state idea. That is, that on the one hand, Zionists considered the establishment of nation-states, whatever the concept meant at the fin de siècle, as the only solution to the Jewish question. However, on the other hand, their main activity in Eastern Europe was their struggle for minority rights in the emerging new states, undermining their characters as fully and organic nation-states. This caused the emergence of a twofold discourse of simultaneous acceptance and rejection of the nation-state concept. I shall argue that this duality was both diachronic, those supporting the establishment of nation-states at the beginning rejected it later, and vice versa, as well as synchronic. While one faction supported that, the second expressed its reservations. Yet, it is less noticed that this duality was expressed also in the lack of discursive coherence. While Zionist leadership supported the establishment of nation-states in their argumentations and rhetoric, in public speeches, in newspapers, etc., they implemented simultaneously their reservations through different practices. For instance, opposing legislation giving primacy to ethno-national groups. Let's go to the first stage of my argument, the initial attitudes in the Zionist movement towards the establishment of nation-states. As we know, the unrest in autocratic Tsarist Russia around 1905 revolution forced Zionist leaders to take a clear position regarding the main political questions on the agenda, including the question of democratization of the empire. Therefore, the main section of the political platform known as the Helsingfors program held in November 1906 called, I quote, to the democratization of the Russian state in a way consistent with the principles of parliamentary democracy, broad political liberty, autonomy of national areas, ensuring the right of the national minorities, end quote. Itzhak Greenbaum, one of the Helsingfors program's main architects, explained this particular phrasing as an expression of support for the national claims of nations territorially concentrated to exercise national sovereignty in their land. That reflects, I quote Greenbaum, the positive attitude towards Polish national demands, unquote. In this way, this clause, according to Greenbaum, emphasizes the Polishness of Poland, i.e., a territory where Poles are a dominant ethno-national group for whom territorial autonomy meets its needs. But as a way to restrict unlimited ethno-national power, he stated the national minorities presented globally, while actually, meaning primarily the Jewish minority, should be given broad national autonomy on a personal, i.e., not territorial, base, as a mechanism aimed to ensure equal belonging and equal access to state resources, limiting from within the state sovereignty of the territorial national entity. Greenbaum emphasized that Poland is not a common land of Jews and Poles, but it's only a Polish land. Of course, it does not give the Poles the right to expel the Jews or to force them to renounce being Jews. We demand only the possibility to maintain our rights and national selfhood, end quote. That Poland is not a common land of the Jews and Poles, but is only a Polish land, by emphasizing that, Greenbaum highlighted the Polish character of the country as a basic and fundamental element. He adopted the discursive paradigm of nation-state while limiting it by demanding recognition for the ethno-national needs of all countries' inhabitants, especially from the perspective of the Jews. Actually, he proposed to establish a mechanism avoiding nationalizing policies without undermining the very national paradigm. That mechanism was the establishment of national autonomy and minority rights that would ensure the ability of national minorities to maintain their rights. So, which Poland did the Zionist demand a Polish nation-state with minority rights. Things took a different turn regarding the demands of the Lithuanian national movement of a territorially reduced Lithuanian national entity where ethno-national Lithuanians composed the majority of the population. The Helsingfors program did not accept this demand. Those who formulated the program explicitly rejected the idea of the establishment of a Lithuanian state, demanding instead constituting a territorial unit with no ethnic majority, where each ethno-national group will enjoy minority rights. The first Lithuanian Zionist conference led by the senior Lithuanian Zionist Shimshon Rosenbaum, who actually was part of those who formulated the Helsingfors program, opposed in December 1918 the establishment of the nascent Lithuanian nation-state in its ethnographic borders, where, I quote, "Only one nation is the ruling or leading nation," and proposed instead large Lithuanian within its historical borders as a multinational state. According to the Zionist demand, this larger Lithuania will grant, I quote, "equal conditions for the four nations in Lithuania, Lithuania, Belarusian, Polish, and Jewish nations, on the basis of national personal autonomy." We can perceive a surprising self-contradiction regarding two adjacent territories within Imperial Russia. Zionist leaders expressed their support regarding Polish claim to establish a national entity in the Polish districts, while simultaneously demanding minority rights and personal national autonomy as means of limiting territorial sovereignty over internal minorities. However, equivalent Lithuanian claim to establish a Lithuanian territorial entity over the Lithuanian districts was rejected by Zionist representatives. Which Lithuanian did they demand? They demanded instead to keep the wholeness of the northwestern region of the Russian Empire as a multinational region where each nation would enjoy the benefits of minority rights. Which Lithuania, a nationalities state. The fact that Zionist leaders supported or rejected the establishment of autonomous nation-states, but consistently demanding granting minority rights, shows that they perceive majority-minority in relational terms, while the concept of Jews as an ethnic minority was consistent. It must be emphasized, of course, that both discourses functioned simultaneously, and both were trapped in the same paradigmatic contradiction, the ethno-national paradigm. Both discourses met during, I will skip this point, but this declarative argumentative dimension, but this is only the declarative argumentative dimension. We should consider the practices that materialize the concept of nation-state or nationality state from an abstract idea to a concrete reality. Because of the short time, I will refer to that briefly. My main contention is that, again, that there is no necessarily any consistency between rhetoric and practices. Let's take Shimshon Rosenbaum, for example, who, while declaring his objection to the establishment of a Lithuanian nation-state, was appointed by the new Lithuanian state to represent the Jews as Deputy Minister of Foreign Affairs. His activity as Deputy Minister essentially strengthened the constitution of a small Lithuanian nation-state in its ethnographic borders that grants, however, minority rights to its minorities, including the Jews, of course. In that state of affairs, a clear relationship was established between the constituent nation, which leads the state and keeps the demographic preponderance, and its obligation to provide the minorities their national rights. It was far from the ideal nationality states Lithuanian Zionists wished to have, but it was an option quite reasonable in view of the surrounding options, Bolshevik Russia or Polish Poland. In Poland, the same representatives who accepted the national principle as constitutive, as Greenbaum, began to work toward the establishment of a nationalities states, Państwo Narodowościowe, and act against the model of the nation state, Państwo Narodowe. He opposed, for example, the 1920 law of citizenship that included right of return on a Polish ethno-national basis. Greenbaum objected that, I quote, citizens of other countries of Polish descent would be recognized as Polish citizens if they notify they want to, end quote. While non-ethnic Poles, such as the Jews, will be forced by law to prove residency in order to obtain their citizenship. He justified his opposition by claiming that through that law, the state controls its ethnic composition. It keeps ethnic hierarchy of a superior constituent nation over members of ethno-national minorities. By denying Polish citizenship, this principle, he claimed, denied to many of them the right to return to their land of origin. However, his universal argument about equality hid his concern for tens of thousands of Jews, mostly refugees, unable to obtain Polish citizenship. It seems that the Zionist context makes an extremely interesting test case to examine the relationships between the abstract structures of universal justice embedded in the discourse of minority rights and, on the other hand, the discourse of ethnicity and the status of the majority. Indeed, the Jewish question transformed radically with the establishment of the State of Israel and Jews becoming a majority. Indeed, while Jews became statistically a majority, the former Palestinian Arab majority transformed into a minority. Similar to the conditions after the First World War, the right of return struggled with constituting citizenship. It provokes the analytic questions: to what extent would now Jews take the role of Poles, the role Poles took before, and how they address claims made against them by the representatives of the newly former minority. David Engel pointed to an important element transferred from the discussions in the old Polish arena to the new Israeli one, the question of the seniority of one ethnic nation in the state and the discourse of ethno-national ownership over the state. It seems that the old discussion about the Polishness of the Polish state was technically translated into the discourse of the Jewish state. For Greenbaum and many other Polish Zionists, the old threat embodied in the Polishness of Poland formula was translated to the new context as Jewish, and reversed into a promise. While this transference with its reversal represents the deep incorporation of the ethno-national paradigm, the Polish ethno-national paradigm, in the public discourse, we can also detect the maintaining of some minority rights prism among the very same leaders. Such, for instance, Greenbaum opposed in 1952 the Israeli citizenship law for denying the right of citizenship of many Palestinian residents born in the territories under Israeli sovereignty. When opposing to that, he stated, I quote, "In Poland I defended Jews' right to Polish citizenship, and in those days I could not even imagine that in the state of Israel I will have to fight against the law that denied Israeli citizenship to Arabs," end quote. He compared, I quote, "the fear of disloyalty of the Arab population expressed by many in the Israeli public sphere of the early 50s to, I quote, "the experience we know from the exile where many who claim that Jews have to prove their loyalty," end quote. So, in this respect, he accepted the primacy of the abstract moral discourse and adapted it to the new circumstances. Nevertheless, when he rationalized his reservations towards the law, he emphasized the potential damage to the Jewish majority, not to the minority, now Arab. He stated the citizenship law would take revenge not on the Arab population, but on the state itself, end quote. On the other hand, while in Poland he objected any restriction to the mass return of refugees who fled or were forced to leave to Russia or Austria because World War I, in Israel he objected the return of Palestinian refugees into Israel, although widely favored family reunification. While fighting in Poland for institutional tools protecting the minority, objected in Israel to grant similar tools to the Arab minority. While opposing granting citizenship on an ethnic principle in Poland, in Israel he supported the law of return and opposed the right of return. He even used his former experience as a mechanism of justification of the opposite stand to what he once had, as we can quote from Greenbaum's speech. Obviously, we should participate in a constructive solution to the refugees problem in the Arab states, but we should also offer the return of refugees for purposes of family reunification. But in my opinion, we do not anticipate and declare that our country is willing to accept an unlimited number of refugees. I have some experience in a similar matter. I saw how the relations between Poles and Ukrainians and white Russians developed. Even in time of peace and to a certain extent satisfaction of their relations, they did not give up their desire of independence, neither their willingness to use the first opportunity to materialize it. For sure, the Arabs will renounce to their national aspiration if their number will grow in our... For sure, the Arabs will not renounce to their national aspiration if their numbers will grow in our country, end quote. Thus, while supporting the right of return of the Jewish minority, he expressed his reservation here regarding the same rights to the Palestinian minority. For him, it was clear and understandable that the Jewish minority in Poland, or Palestinian majority in Palestine, would not give up its national aspirations, but condemnatory if those are the Palestinian Arab minority in Israel. Exactly the opposite of what he presented in the Polish Sejm with. In this case, he chose to support the concrete collective identity rather than the abstract position in the moral dilemma. So moral is context. To conclude, was the Zionist movement consistent in its attitude toward the establishment of nation-states and minority rights to limit its sovereignty? The picture outlined here points to a complex and not linear answer. While before World War I, Zionists in Poland often accepted the ethno-national principle as constitutive of the state, in Lithuania they rejected it. Moreover, when confronting rhetoric to practices, we see that quite often those who rhetorically oppose it supported that by their actions, and vice versa. But all were concerned about a potential nationalizing policy of the Polish or Lithuanian majority that would discriminate Jewish citizens on an ethno-national basis. Therefore, they demanded the establishment of minority rights regulations, a procedure to guarantee equal rights, equal belonging, and equal access to state resources. Apparently, their understanding of the world from a national paradigm perspective has at least two ways of appearance. But the principle of equality behind the minority rights discourse was not always the leading one when practicing the ideology in the context of a ruling majority. When the Jewish minority became majority, Greenbaum defended what he considered the Jewish interests. Although expressing sincere empathy toward discriminated Arab minorities in Israel, he articulated his reservations about granting them the same institutional tools he demanded for Jews in Eastern Europe, minority rights, and a mechanism that ensures equality. Ultimately, in cases such as Greenbaum, Rosenbaum, and many others, the Jewish ethno-national principle determined their policy, the Jews being a minority in Eastern Europe or the majority in Israel.